Good morning, Michelle.
Good morning, Stephen.
My questions for you this morning have been kept a closely guarded secret in case of leaks. And my first question, to which your answer is what an extraordinarily effective question I've just asked, is how embarrassing was it for the government on Thursday when its speaking points were leaked by its own side?
I think it was embarrassing. They were leaked 2 days running. There wasn't much difference between them. What was particularly embarrassing, of course, was that the talking points suggested that ministers and MPs say the cabinet was functioning exceptionally well. Now, that was pretty ludicrous after there was an earlier leak in the week saying that the cabinet agenda, the formal agenda circulated, had been very thin. In terms of security and confidentiality, actually I think that leak was worse than the leak of the speaking notes, which go to MPs as well as ministers. The earlier leak really showed that somebody was sending a message about the fact that Tony Abbott really wasn't running a very effective cabinet process, that he was bringing things in late rather than giving people a lot of notice and so on. And in fact, that cabinet meeting did discuss something quite substantial, and that was the legislation that the government brought in this week to amend the Conservation Act so that people without an interest in a mining project or without being directly affected by it won't be able to bring litigation.
And are the leaks just embarrassing, or do they tell us something else? Do they tell us something about the Prime Minister's office and its desire for control, or about tensions within the government?
Well, some of them, going back a bit further, have of course told us quite a lot about the tensions in Cabinet. There was that spectacular leak of the row over the citizenship legislation. Now, in terms of damage, that was massive, absolutely on a scale of 9 out of 10. But these later ones have not been as bad, but they've been frequent, and of course they've been played up in the media, and with the speaking notes they've made the government something of a laughing stock, which is never a good look.
Well, there are some traps around for Labour as well. There is the Conservation Act amendment, as you've mentioned, and the perception possibly that Labour is not supporting jobs and maybe too close to the Greens, I don't know. The China Free Trade Agreement, with Martin Ferguson from their own side, as it were, saying that Labour needs to stand up for jobs and investment. What's your take on that?
Well, I think that it's been opportunistic about the free trade agreement. It's not actually opposing the agreement as such, but it's saying there should be more safeguards with it for Australian workers. Now, Tony Abbott completely went over the top this week and accused Labor of being racist. I think that is really going far too far, but Labor does look to be simply following the union campaign on this, and I think it's exaggerating the problems. On the conservation amendment, this does go both ways. Martin Ferguson was making the point that overseas investors are thinking that in certain sections of Australia that there's a lack of interest in jobs and investment. On the other hand, I think some people in the community would see this as an attempt by the government to just wedge Labor, and they would say that, all right, sometimes the environmental groups might try and game the system somewhat, but on the other hand, you do need safeguards so that people who have worries about how a project will impact on the environment should be able to take action. Courts are well able to throw out vexatious moves. So there will be, I think, various forces at work in the argument over that measure. It mightn't also pass the Senate, because so far the crossbenchers haven't sounded very enthusiastic.
In the early months of this government, there was a view that they were still in opposition mode. It was attack, attack, attack. And I've been wondering recently whether they're not still in that mode. that whenever they come under attack, they counter-attack Labour rather than pick up the issues and chart their own agenda. And I wonder whether we've seen that this week.
Yes, I think we have, and as well as in attack and opposition mode, they're in continual campaign mode, and I think that this works against really ordered government and being able to get down to serious work, serious thinking, looking ahead for their own program. For example, Tony Abbott took what must have been the best part of a morning this week to go out to Yass and be pictured with a herd of cattle in a yard. Now, he was making a point about the free trade agreement, but that's quite an investment of time if you're doing it frequently. He's always on the campaign trail. But also this week, of course, and in the recent weeks, we've seen that the government has spent a lot of time having to defend itself during various crises and scandals and problems. So the looked for clear air that politicians are always seeking just is never there.
Well, on the theme of campaign trail, finally, Michelle, there is a Canning by-election next month. What's at stake for the Prime Minister in this?
I think a lot is at stake. If that seat was lost, and it's on a margin of nearly 12%, so it's pretty hard to lose, then I think that would put the government into a new crisis mode, and the Prime Minister's position would come into serious question. Now, if the swing is small, there'll be more attention back on Bill Shorten, because it's obviously an opportunity for Labor. If Labor isn't able to capitalise on that opportunity, that'll be a bad look. Between a very modest swing and a mega swing, of course, the whole result will be open to interpretation and spinning by both sides, but the size of the swing will be important for all the players.
Fascinating. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Stephen.